Welcome to this conversation. I'm sitting down with Matt Rinaldi. He is the chairman of the Republican Party of Texas. Matt Rinaldi, we are in the final days of the Republican nomination process. I want to talk about that. I want to talk to you about the Republican convention and talk to you a little bit about November. You've been the party chairman for a little less than a year, and because you haven't gone running and screaming to some other state, I assume that you feel like it's going okay.
I think it's going well. We're strong financially as a party. I think we're more united as a party than ever before going into these runoff elections and into the convention and ultimately to November. And we got the wind at our backs. I mean, with Biden and his low approval ratings, I think it's going to be a good election year for Republicans.
Okay, I will come back to that here in a minute. But first, the Republican Party under your leadership has done something a little different, engaging in a full-throated way in local races, particularly school board races.
Correct.
Now, why was that important to you? Why should that be important to more folks?
Well, because, school board elections obviously are closer to the people. They affect families more directly than I think any other level of government, what your child's learning at school and the type of citizen they're turning them into. However, lately, obviously, we've seen the Biden administration basically nationalize school board issues by Merrick Garland and the Department of Justice effectively saying they're going to target parents that criticize their school boards over things like critical race theory or sexualization of children in schools. So we thought it was important. Also, the Democrat Party has been making these elections partisan for years. So we thought it was important to get involved. And we did it this election with tremendous success.
Well, I was going to say, so, when we look out around the state, historically, when I'm talking the last 20, 30 years, turnout in school board races has been very low. If you had 5% turnout in these races, it was, considered a big turnout election. By the party endorsing, are you hoping that that's going to inspire some voters who maybe in the past have kind of written it off as something that doesn't matter? Are you hoping to inspire folks to turn out in those races?
Yeah, we're trying to bring in new voters. I mean, if you look at each of these races, if you look at the Republican primary voter turnout and I guess overlay that into the normal school board election, the Republican Party can determine every single one of these elections throughout the states on these joint elections simply by participating. So what we want to do is we want to be involved in these elections since there are so many issues that are important to our delegates, to our party members, like critical race theory, like stopping sexualization of children, and obviously taxes with the school board, with the schools being the biggest portion of your tax bill. We want to be involved in these elections. And we've been successful even in areas where there aren't a lot of Republicans.
Right. Well, something you said I think is important, that the pushback that I've heard from Republicans, to be very clear, the pushback I've heard in previous years was, oh, well, the Republican Party surely can't endorse in local elections because those are nonpartisan elections. But yet the Democrats, they would spend money,
Yep.
They would endorse, they would talk up candidates. So you're really kind of leveling the playing field, not doing anything that's weird and wacky in Texas, just different from the way way Republicans have approached it.
I mean, it's kind of a silly thing to say in 2022 that school board elections are nonpartisan when your choice of razor blade is partisan now. I mean, pretty much everything has turned political. So surely local elections are political as well. And the issues that are coming up in those races are important Republican platform issues, like opposing critical race theory.
Right.
Like teaching appropriate topics in schools for children of a particular age.
I can't remember who first said this to me, and I'd be interested in your take on it. They said that, if Republicans' principles, if our values, if the things that we say we believe can't be applied locally, then what's the point in them? And that stuck with me for a long time, thinking, that's not a bad way of looking at the world. If your ideas only matter in some esoteric debate before the Supreme Court, then maybe you need to rethink your positions a little bit.
No, I agree. And I think the way in which they've been applied also this past election was better coordinated than they ever have been before, because a lot of these are coming in from the local level. It isn't the Republican Party of Texas explicitly endorsing. It's Harris County GOP endorses candidates and asks for help from the state party, and we might send out an email targeted to a district or do something else to get out voters in that district. We might share our texting data with a particular school board candidate to allow them to get out voters. So I think the way we coordinate it was better than ever before. And I know in the races I personally endorsed in, I think we won like 13 of 17 races. We were hitting about a 75% success rate, I think, around the state of Texas.
Right. You know, at that rate, you could almost be a member of Congress investing. I'm sorry, not going to cover that. All right, so let's talk now about the race that is coming up immediately, and that is the Republican primary. Early voting's going on right now, and of course, the primary runoff day is Tuesday, the 24th. Why, Nim, I'll ask you as the Republican Party of Chairman, ask you as a former member of the legislature, why are primaries important, and particularly why are these runoffs important?
Well, because I mean, in order to get our conservative priorities passed as Republicans, as Republican Party priorities, also your personal priorities, which each individual might have, we need people willing to fight for them. I can tell you as a member of the legislature, the status quo is essentially what would happen unless you have people who are disrupting the status quo and trying to fight hard in order to get something done. We need to identify who those people are in the primary and elect the right people, or our Republican priorities won't go anywhere. That's why that's why it's very important.
So it's been very interesting over the last couple of months as issues pop out in the news, maybe even as candidates take positions. You have, unlike many of your predecessors, not been afraid to say, hey, I'm not injecting myself into pick one candidate or the other, but I am going to tell you this is the position of the Republican Party. This is the position that the platform takes. You know, why has it been important to you? And again, I would suggest, I mean, you're a friend, so maybe I'm blowing smoke up your skirt here, but I feel like you've done it in a respectful way. You haven't attacked any candidate, but you have made clear this. Why have you felt like that's important to do?
Well, nor have we taken a position supporting a particular candidate or not in an election, but we will make statements like the Republican Party of Texas supports school choice,
right?
Which is a statement of fact and one that I guess should draw people's attention to particular issues, especially in the primaries where candidates may differ. I mean, every candidate's going to say they're pro-life. Every candidate's going to say they're pro-Second Amendment. But on issues like school choice, this is an opportunity for Republican voters to ask the candidates when they're campaigning and lock down their position so that when they do get elected, they're going to have to fulfill that promise to voters. Another issue that I just brought up too yesterday, which I think is very important, and I think it's united people from all wings of the Republican Party, moderate, conservative, is we should not have 40% of our committee chairs in the Texas House be Democrats, especially when the Republican Party is trying to raise money to win elections in November. And by virtue of all of these committee chairmanships, money is being funneled to Democrats that they are then using to donate to Beto O'Rourke and other Democrats so they can win elections in November. Right. When we win these elections, we should be appointing Republicans to run the Texas House, not Democrats.
So as a former member of the legislature, when you were in that chamber for the several terms, how influential is the committee chair in the movement of legislation? Because I occasionally hear some of these folks, it doesn't really matter who the committee chair is because Republicans are in charge. Is that true?
Well, no. It's not. The committee chair is very influential, and to some extent, the speaker obviously directs the committee chairs to either move or not move certain legislation. But if you have a Democrat chair who is going to be politically harmed by moving pro-gun legislation, for example, they're not going to move it, no matter what the speaker says. So they do act as a stopgap.
Is it fair or unfair, I'm willing to be corrected here, to say that the choice of committee chair is in many ways the Speaker of the Texas House, whoever that Speaker might be, offering insight into their policy direction. So when you appoint someone who absolutely hates parks and you put them in an oversight position over the state parks, that might communicate something to you. Is that fair or unfair? Is that a
No, it's very fair. I mean, you could tell the makeup of, you could tell whether or not school choice legislation was going to move by who was chairing the education committee. And if Representative Huberty was chairing the education committee, school choice legislation wasn't going to move, for example. So yeah, it does provide a window into the speaker's thinking. For example, when Speaker Bonnet was speaker, he appointed some conservatives to committee chairmanships.
Right.
And I remember having a conversation with a friend. It was like, oh, some of those committee chairmanships look pretty promising. And I could say, he's not moving any conservative legislation because look at the calendars committee. There's not a single conservative on the calendars committee. So what he's going to do is provide this I guess, illusion of moving conservative legislation and giving conservatives a seat at the table, but there's the stopgap right there. And that's what happened.
All right. So a moment ago, you said something that I want to kind of wrap into then is, you said, the Republican Party believes. The Republican Party is in favor of school choice, I think you said. That's determined at the convention, right? This is not something Matt Rinaldi sitting in his lazy boy, sipping a cup of coffee, just kind of randomly comes up, what's the Republican Party for? These are decisions made by 10,000 delegates, right? And that's coming up in June. Tell us why the convention's important for things like setting policy.
Well, it's June 16th to the 18th. And it is important because it's not only a place to get together and network, it's a place where we set our direction for the next 2 years. We set our policy priorities, we set our platform. And why that's important is it's effectively my marching orders for the next 2 years. We have the power of holding the Texas GOP brand in the state of Texas, which says something to voters when we're talking about issues like school choice, pro-life, like opposing gun control. It means something. And this is giving our marching orders on certain issues. So during the legislative session, we can say Republicans support school choice. We support the protection of life. We support ending taxpayer funded lobbying, et cetera, et cetera.
And that's what comes out of the convention.
Correct.
And so, and this is where I'll betray maybe my own occasional frustration with the Republican Party, and has been that, okay, we have 10,000 delegates who come. They will invest not only the week of the 4 days of the convention for most people, the week for more folks, what committees they're on, but in many cases, months of folks working on, precinct resolutions of county platforms and all those sorts of things and building up to the party. And then, so now you have the Republican Party of Texas is in favor of this thing. But what good is it when you have a Republican-dominated legislature, many of whom will say very glibly, oh, I don't read the Republican platform. I don't pay attention to that. Why should the grassroots activists in 2022 believe that it is worth their time? Why should the Republican faithful believe that it's important to go to Houston in June for the convention and engage in the party platform? Why should they care this time if lawmakers haven't cared previously?
Well, because they should care, because unlike in most states, the Texas GOP is not merely just a cheerleading society for elected officials. I mean, listen, we've all been frustrated when, we see the Republicans not holding up the Republican brand in practice. We haven't turned the electoral victories into policy victories like many people had hoped. And then you get the RNC mailer just going rah, rah, and the brand loses some of its luster. We've been trying to protect the Republican brand name in Texas so that when we are asked to opine on issues before the legislature, we make statements and it hopefully means something. And when we do, it does put pressure on elected officials to pay attention to those issues, to hopefully move bills that we are directing the grassroots attention to in accordance with what they put in the party platform. And then in the end, we hope that drives debate. Now, obviously, this was it was the result of groups like Texas Scorecard and Texas Right to Life and gun groups across the state of Texas, like NAGR and such. So I'm not saying sole credit, but a lot of the credit of constitutional carry being passed, like the heartbeat bill being passed, is due to these grassroots groups, grassroots individuals, conservative legislators, and the Republican Party of Texas drawing people's attention to those issues and keeping them in the public eye and speaking about them in public. Nobody expected either of those to pass.
Right.
Last session.
Okay, so as we look at the Republican convention, at this point, the delegates are set and the alternates and those kind of things. But can normal people come to the convention? Can they come and observe the goings on? And how do they do that?
Yes, they can come as a guest. You can enroll on the Texas GOP website to get credentials. We're going to have 9,500 delegates and alternates there at the convention. It's actually the largest Republican convention in the country. It's larger than the national RNC convention. So yeah, we'd love to have as many strong Republicans there as possible.
If memory serves, I think the only larger political gathering in the world is when the Chinese Communist Party meets. So that's your competition, Rinaldi.
There you go.
Yeah. Okay, so also at the convention is when the party leadership is decided on. At this moment, the last I heard, you're unopposed, and I'm sure you won't correct me if I'm wrong. But also on that race is the vice chair of the party. The rules of the Republican Party, if the chair is male, the vice chair must be female, and vice versa, and that sort of thing. So for the delegates who are attending the convention, as they're looking at the candidates for vice chair, one, does the job matter? Maybe number one. And number two, what kind of questions should they ask? Beyond who's got the biggest elephant hat and who's got the reddest, socks or whatever it may be. What are the things that we should be asking these candidates?
Well, so the job description of the vice chair is very vague. It's basically to assist the chair in the performance of his or her duties. So you are
whatever that means.
Whatever that means. So you are going to want a vice chair that shares the same direction as the chair, that works well with the chair, that shares the same direction, that has the time to put into the role. I mean, you obviously don't want somebody who's charting a different path than the chair, because it makes it very hard to assist somebody you disagree with, right? So you want two people who share the same goals, who generally have the same vision for the party. And you want somebody with the time to devote to it. Because I can tell you, being a chair, very time-consuming job. Having a vice chair who's able to put the work in is very helpful.
Excellent. All right, so we kind of began the interview talking about this. I want to circle back to it. How big of an impact is the national economic and political scene going to impact Texas in November? I think there's been a perception in the past that, sometimes it doesn't really matter what's going on. Texas does its own thing. Do you think in 2022, the national melees, whatever you want to call it, is that going to impact Texas elections?
Yes, I think it has. Just because I think we're in a once-in-a-generation presidency right now, possibly once in more than a generation. In that, I don't think anyone alive today.
We may not last another generation with this administration.
I don't think anybody alive today has seen a president with greater disregard for Americans than this president. I mean, it's been an absolute disaster in every walk of life, and his approval ratings, I think, reflect that. And that's going to bubble down to every single partisan race on the ballot everywhere, including Texas. I think one of the polls that I think shows how bad it is for him was a CNN poll that was done a couple months ago, where they asked, is there any single thing you approve of President Biden doing? Like one thing, anything. And 56% of people said no. And I was kind of interested, so I looked at the crosstabs on the poll and what they actually asked. And they didn't just ask the general question. They went through a list of like 40 things, and it included the economy, immigration, but it also included, and I'm not even joking, it was like, do you approve of his choice of cat? And do you approve of the fact that he's trying his hardest? And 56% of the people said, no, to heck with this guy. I don't even like his cat. Get him out. I mean, that's the kind of voter anger that is going to bubble down to every single place on the ballot.
How do you recommend, again, as someone who has not just been a cheerleader for candidates, you've been a candidate, you've been a successful candidate, how should the successful state rep, the person for JP, in whatever position where they've got a partisan label next to their name, how do you recommend they capitalize on that?
Well, I think you have to talk about how politics is affecting everybody's individual lives right now. We saw 4 years ago, people didn't really care about the culture war that much until their children started being affected by it in schools, and then we showed that it did. They didn't care when the federal government was handing out checks to everybody until their gas cost $4.50 a gallon and they couldn't find anything on the store shelves. So I think we need to talk about how liberal policies have destroyed individuals' lives and harmed people more than ever before. And I think we need to talk about how we have a different view and a different course.
All right, well, Matt Rinaldi, thank you so much for taking time to come to the 1836 studios to sit down and have this conversation. And to all of you, thanks for participating in this conversation. Throw your questions and comments at us, anything you'd like to add, even like to see us visit with. And be sure to check out TexasScorecard.com for the latest news and information. Texas Scorecard is going to be covering the Republican convention this June. So whether you're there or not, you'll be able to keep up with all the goings on. Until then, have a fantastic day.
You made it to the end of this video. You're probably one in a million. But since you're here, make sure you go to TexasScorecard.com to find more journalism and commentary, all things pertaining to Texas. Make sure you also like this video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and hit the bell. That way you can be notified when new videos come out. Thanks.